Hey class. So this week we're going into something a bit tougher. Content warning abound. A lot of the stuff we're going to talk about today includes some of the darker parts of the internet. And this is actually my area of specialty. As you all know at this point, I have studied memes as my graduate degree, but really, like I told you earlier, that's coded for internet culture. And as I'm sure none of you are surprised by, most of my research resides in the study of extremism and online radicalization. So that's really what I've been studying for about 5 years now. It started just before, actually right around the time I started working on Pepe. For obvious reasons, that was my entry point into studying extremism. I'm part of a confab, a specialized confab of researchers, journalists, academics, who come together once a year to kind of get their sense of being together and re-understand the environment that exists out there inside internet world and what we can do about it and how we report on it and how we speak about it. So this is my area of specialty. However, this is going to be a short lecture. It might be longer than usual. I'm not sure how long this is going to end up at the beginning here, because this is not something you could cram into like a 20 to 25 minute bit. This is a really in-depth conversation that should be had in person, really, no joke. Like, this is not something that is easy to deliver via virtual anything. But that being said, I know enough of this topic that I'll be able to give you a broad survey or overview of this. But like I said, this is serious topic and content warnings abound. And what we're going to talk about today is extreme culture and radicalization. Now, I would consider this the peak middle of the course. I know we're beyond the halfway point, but really this is as deep as we're going to get as far as the way we understand social media critically. And I'm prefacing it that way because we're going to start bending away from this more toward the surface level material. But I think you need to understand extremism and radicalization, because the way in which people become radicalized and the way in which people fall down rabbit holes is how the internet itself is built, how the web was constructed, and how the hegemony of, meaning the overall structure of the web, was founded. And unfortunately, those ways in which it was built are not replaceable or easily fixed, so to speak. So we have to kind of deal with them in ways that make us more critically understanding of how the platforms actually operate and what social media has to do with radicalization rabbit holes. So today I'm going to cover about 4 things. That this way it keeps us a little tight. And we'll go into one of my favorite journals and researchers. But we're going to talk about rabbit holes in general, meta text, memes, and what happens with speech in general. What is hate speech and how does that operate? So we're going to start with something that's a common trope. And the common trope that is probably the most common trope on the internet at this point is the red pill. And so the red pill is a term that comes from the Wachowski's film, The Matrix. And I know at this point it's like a dated reference, but I still recommend you watch this film at some point if you get the time. It is a movie that I was a senior in high school when it came out, and I saw it like 3 times in the first night. I only paid for it once, but it was so amazing that I really wanted to see it over and over again. But the term the red pill is during a scene which may be out of context for you, but it's when Morpheus decides to tell Neo that there's a real world that exists behind the structure of the world that he thinks he lives in that's real, which he has a sense of knowledge. Neo kind of feels like there's another world that he hasn't seen yet, and Morpheus decides to show him that. And by giving him the red pill, he's released into the real world, which is this grimy, structured, end-of-the-world place that takes place 200 years after right now. And it is someplace that's overrun by the robots. It is a post-apocalyptic world. And he's given the pills to do that. And the blue pill he doesn't take. The blue pill just basically erases memory and he's back to the world. There is no blue pill in our world, but there are lots of red pills. The red pill today, before I go into the red pill in the film is a metaphor for the directors who are both transgender women. And the film is actually a metaphor for their experience of seeing the world through a different body that they were born into. So right off the bat, you just know that the meaning of the red pill is different than what most people take it as. But the red pill has become known as the way people become radicalized or fall into rabbit holes. And radicalization can take place in many different ways. There's not just a red pill, there's many different pills. And what that is you becoming hyper aware of a reality beyond the structure of what you've known. So in a way, when we talk about things, you learn more about anything, you're becoming slightly red-pilled, so to speak. It's a bad terminology, and it's not usually used in good faith. In other words, it's used as a onboarding tactic. And that's what we have to know first about radicalization, is that it's onboarding. There's usually a doorway. There's a way in which you kind of experience somebody else's behavior inside of these spaces, and somebody offers you a viewpoint into a world that isn't the one you currently exist in, but resembles it enough that it allows you to believe it. And in that belief, it ruins your structure. There's a better word for this, and it's called education. When you learn something, when you become more knowledgeable about anything, you start seeing the world differently. That's how we are. We change. As human beings, we've had to communicate and change and educate ourselves throughout history in order for progress to happen. You don't just go from stone tools to USB drives by not learning new things and changing. We're different now. And you could tell how different we are because of how much we take things for granted. So that tells you a lot about how the progress of just life in its evolution is that of change. A rapid change would be a red pilling, and that would be a switch into a new reality, usually a structure that is actually not too real whatsoever, but is cohered by a community. That's your first thing you have to know about radicalization, is that it is usually a community inside that has become red-pilled before you or radicalized before you, and they share some viewpoints for you. Usually those who have been red-pilled or are already radicalized already have had signs of usually three main factors, and that is doubt. You doubt the way that structures work in your favor. Some places make you disenfranchised, and you may be disenfranchised. I think we all share this. Disenfranchisements mean that you don't feel as if you have a say, that you feel somewhat powerless, that some ways that you're not able to. Now, this could take place politically through gerrymandering or some sort of political structure in which you've been left out of the system. If you are not a white male, usually disenfranchisement has layers of different disenfranchisement all the way down. So the more you are distinctly separated from the way that there is a priority, racialized or patriarchal priority, everywhere distant from that could be much more disenfranchised. You will have potentially less of a say, less income, and in that way you feel powerless. The second is vulnerable. Sometimes you feel vulnerable to this. Sometimes you feel as if there's some sort of way in which you're weak to that. So you've opened your heart, you're vulnerable to these things. And that vulnerability leaves you to the worst part of all this, which is fear. Fear appears in the most strange ways possible. Fear can be anything. Fear can be literally waking up in the middle of the night with anxiety that your homework is late. Yeah, fear can be placed in the way that you're not sure where your life is going or what's going to happen beyond the pandemic. Fear can be how you're worried about your friends or your family. But manifesting fear, what happens when you manifest that means you seek to lose that fear. There are two ways to lose that fear. One is confronting it, is literally directly confronting it, which is very difficult. And that can be taken place through therapy, that can be taken place through going on experiences, going on adventures, talking to friends, finding some sort of healthy community, or engaging in ways that try to bolster your inner structure of confidence and pride. That is not easy, and that is not a solution, so I'm not offering that as like, oh, that's easy to fix. That is extremely difficult to fix, and we all have to face our own problems. They come with all of us. What happens is that if you have the fear or you feel vulnerable and disenfranchised, oftentimes the distrust manifests in a place to seek answers. And in seeking answers, that's what we call the rabbit hole. The rabbit hole is a place in which you fall into. It is taken from the Alice in Wonderland reference, which is also at the very beginning of the movie, The Matrix, which he falls into the rabbit hole, and he follows the white rabbit in literally the opening scene of the film. And, the second opening scene, the first one is Trinity doing this weird kick. And when he is falling into the rabbit hole, or Alice falls into the rabbit hole, it means going deeper and deeper. The problem with the rabbit holes is once you're in, it's very difficult to get back out. Rabbit holes themselves are self-fulfilling. Once you're in a rabbit hole, you are, quote, doing your own research. You have started to distrust the systems of accountability that have been in place beforehand. Those could be professors, priests, They could be police officers, they can be politicians, they could be any person who may be a person of power has now lost your trust. So now you're looking to seek new places to find that trust. And by doing research, you start uncovering new truths. These new truths aren't truths. These new truths may be structured fallacies that feel real enough to believe in because they pinpoint actual structural flaws. Many conspiracy theories, which is a tangent from this conversation, are built in extremist modes to begin with. Conspiracy theories themselves require you to fall in a rabbit hole. And conspiracy theories exist because usually they're founded on something that really does exist. Conspiracy theories add an additional component, paranoia. That paranoia is often the ultra awareness of these structural problems and you become consumed by it. So conspiracy theory offers answers. David Nyworth's book, Red Pill, Blue Pill, says something really important. One, a conspiracy theory has never actually been solved by a conspiracy theorist. It just hasn't happened yet. Conspiracy theories are solved by people with authority, police officers, journalists, reporters, and so forth. That's how conspiracies are solved. So usually there's a problem with the idea of having a conspiracy theory in general because there's no real structural reality to it, only the confidence that it might be true. Second, to know if you're stuck in a rabbit hole is the amount of actors involved in any of these research spaces. In other words, if you fall into a conspiracy theory, the first question you should ask yourself, and this was actually recently come up in the Cecil Hotel special on Netflix, which is at a certain point, if there are more than, let's say, 3 people involved in any conspiracy theory, it's easy to debunk because it's almost impossible to keep a secret from the human public when the conspiracy becomes involved with too many people. So if you can't self-debunk, other people try to find other rabbit holes and further radicalize you. Radicalization is the concretization of all of these fears. So radicalization is when it's very difficult to come back out of a rabbit hole. That's when you're like, now you know. So you could become radicalized in many different ways. Radicalizing moment for me was during the financial crisis in 2008. During that moment, I was really peeled apart. I'm not going to go too much into my backstory. I would probably do that more if we were in person, but I was a completely different person in my college years. I was radicalized on a completely different way, whole other side. And so that ability to get myself out of it, I was able to get myself out through learning about one of the people who radicalized me's pathological bad actor behavior. And I was able to actually see, oh my gosh, I've fallen into one of these things. That's not as easy for most people. And in fact, one of the homework assignments is reading about somebody else's role in de-radicalization. But my radicalization toward politics and capitalism happened during the financial crisis. It was really one of those moments where it broke my reality a bit. And I was able to see more into what could be the reality and structure. So to say that I'm radicalized is okay, but it also keeps in mind that I have a background in journalism. And that background in journalism, I keep reminding myself that I have to look bigger. You have to zoom out just a bit. That's how I keep my center. The bigger the picture you could place yourself in and where you exist in both the universe and temporally gives you a better sense of what is actually happening. The internet itself is built to radicalize you. It is built to, 1, keep your attention. We've talked about this over every single class. All these times they want your eyes on the screen. Even what we're doing here, I want you to be watching the screen. So I'm trying to keep your attention. So that idea is there, but around this screen is all your distractions, is everything else. And on the side of YouTube screens, you're going to see your recommended videos, the things that are related to the things I wrote in the description. That's called the algorithm. But it's also based on the influence. Because I post these videos unlisted, there's not really too much influence that I'm giving to other channels. But many people who know how to radicalize or use these tools use social media to influence or mention other people. So you may go and click on them. By doing that, you create, as we've talked about with last class, you create your own search feeds, you create your own algorithm. Everyone is completely different. Every one of us have a very distinct and different algorithm and feed from everyone else. But if we cohere around one specific influencer, we all can be steered in a specific direction. Becca Lewis wrote the Alternate Influence Report several years ago, and she showed that beyond the algorithm, it's actually about the actors and influencers, the people who push you toward other influencers. All these things that I'm mentioning, by the way, I'm going to put in the Substack, so you'll have links to all of this. What ends up happening as we go through the idea of what radicalization means and what it means to be in an extreme culture is what happens when all of this stuff becomes a grift. So I'm going to spend the last bit here talking about the grift. The grift of radicalization is part and parcel of social media. Those are people who profit from the energy that comes from this. Sometimes when I refer to memes, and you've heard me say this before, memes contain energy. They contain a premise and desire to take action. Most of us, I'm talking the vast majority of all of us, won't take action. We won't get up. We're going to stay in our seats and we're going to laugh at a meme. But occasionally, some of these memes are packed with metatextual energy. They incite you. They try to get you to feel anger. They try to get you to feel confusion. They try to get you to feel something. That feeling, that energy built into those things can be monetized, that's the grift, or can be activated, making you do something. And in that means that we have to worry about bad actors who have made meme pages or energy pages, I guess was the way to call it, that tell you to do something, whether that be to harass, dox, attack, react, do whatever because somebody has told you to do so. But that creates a sub-industry because the internet itself is built on the structure of extremism itself. You don't have to become extremist as a bad actor, but extremism means the attention economy. When we read the YouTube Populism and the Commodity, the Authentic, the subtext of that article, if you read between the lines, was that every time you're using the internet and you normalize your behavior, you'll notice your views plateau or start lowering. And so over time, you realize you have to up it. You have to become more extreme to get the views. And those more extreme levels get kind of scary because eventually you are driven by people's views, which you don't know that you're not in control of, that the algorithm or the other influencers have driven your traffic. You're no longer in control of that. So what you do is you create more extreme content for people to show up and watch your material. And that becomes a cycle of extremism. So, and that cycle of extremism doesn't have to be hate speech, that doesn't have to be danger, that could just be actions, things you do. Your pranks can become normal, and then all of a sudden you're doing things that are really, really intense, and that's the level of extremism it goes. So on the bit about hate speech, we're covered by our First Amendment rights. You technically have the right to say anything you'd like, including hate speech. You are protected by your First Amendment. The line where we call extremism is when it potentially can hurt somebody. That's the line. So you may be protected under your First Amendment rights to say whatever you'd like, but you are not protected from your consequences. That is, a Supreme Court case in our history allowed us to say whatever we'd like, but we are not immune from the consequences that come from it. Hate speech is any type of energetic speech that causes action or violence. That's what hate speech actually is. So you could, if you say anything bad, if you say something worse than bad and it causes somebody pain, you are no longer protected under the First Amendment, which is why certain words aren't to be said ever, because it causes people pain. And that's where hate speech actually comes in, is that you may not think you're physically hurting somebody, but you are hurting somebody. And that is not protected by the First Amendment. But that's the line. And I don't know if we've ever brought this up before, but it's about something known as the Overton window. The Overton window is the level of okayness, the ability to be okay and talk within a space of agreed communication. In other words, what is the levels of how close you can get to hurting somebody to how banal something can be on the other end? That's the level of speech that we have. That window gets wider every year as we normalize new words, as we normalize new behavior. But the problem with the Overton window is that what's outside the window also gets worse. So how big the Overton window is in conjunction with the things outside the Overton window, which we try never to normalize, because what we try to do is try to keep people at least safe in their environments. That's the very least thing. And that's why I brought up last class about trust and safety. Trust and safety is the web's way of basically governing speech in digital spaces. They could figure all of that out. There's a really phenomenal article, which I'm going to make a note here, about the real rules of speech online. If you want to read it, it's a long read, but it's about how does trust and safety decide what is okay to say and what isn't okay to say. And that is a really important thing to really experiment with and understand, because that is our levels of understanding each other in these physical spaces. So I want to just get to the last bit here. Before I assign the homework, there's a couple of people who you should be focusing on with all of this. And some of these people are journalists who write about this. Taylor Lorenz, who does coverage of internet culture, Ben Collins, Brandy Zadrozny. These are just to name a few. Charlie Warzel, who you read about, Brianna Wu. These are all people who have actually done the research, people who know how to talk about extremism, how to talk about communities. And we haven't even gotten to QAnon, and honestly, that's not something we're going to get to in this class in depth for many reasons. It's outside, literally QAnon, it sits outside the Overton window, but that's something that's a discussion that would take us too long. But that's an extremist group that has become radicalized to something that's unreality. But a lot of these things, and this is from Ben Collins' threads, is to say that understanding that some of these platforms drive us to do things that are really, really bad, and the companies, thanks to Section 230, often get away with facilitating this language. He says here in a thread, one of my favorite threads ever, I'm going to share this thread with you. A part of my job now is to cover extremists who get their ideas from social media and took it out on people in real life. The synagogue shooter, the pipe bomb guy, so many school shooters I can't count. Yet I'm browbeaten by executives. Social media isn't real life. Really? Every time it's a variation on a theme. Video games to YouTube to 4chan to targeted harassment campaigns to complete social isolation to Discord chats to niche far-right forums where you get called N-hero if you kill enough people. Yet it's never the company's faults. So as a reporter, when social networks do the bare minimum, I give them the benefit of the doubt. I go on TV and I say, look, they're trying. Then another shooter with a YouTube account, another widespread harassment campaign getting the next one riled up. Is that trying? There needs to be actual accountability. People who run social media companies would have to be completely asleep not to see this by now, to not hear these stories. They're living among widespread violence and discord. Their algorithms are abetting, and they just let it autoplay. And that bit, that thread, which I'll share with you, has really driven my experience to understanding how to talk about this. And that thread has become part and parcel of what I want to do as a structural talk about it. Like I said, this is really hard to jam into a small space, but it's about internet literacy. If you become fluent in internet, you know what I'm talking about. If you become fluent enough to understand how the internet operates, you get a sense of it and you can feel this. There's kind of like this underbelly, this feeling that you know that the internet is doing this at all times. And it's something that we have to, when I say at the end of our talks to be vigilant, that's kind of what I mean, is that we have to create a structural norm or reality outside of the internet so we can always look away. When I was a color corrector for television shows, that's where you like do the last step and you fix the colors on TV shows so they don't have like all the different cameras. They used to have on the board a big white card and a big black card right next to each other. And this is so when you occasionally got your eyes stuck, you look at them and reset everything. Those were our reality checks. Those were our ability to get a baseline of everything again, to reset your eyes so you could see color again. And when we're online or too online, and the pandemic has been brutal for this, we get sucked into a new reality that we're not really aware, hasn't really ever been there. We believe it to be longitudinal because digital memory is not great because everything is two-dimensional. If everything exists behind the screen, everything in your mind is seeing it as a two-dimensional workspace. It's not a three-dimensional workspace. No matter how deep you go on the internet, it's still behind a screen. And those are the things where you have to detach every so often. Take a breather, take some time off, give yourself a digital media blackout, spend at least 6 hours once a week just not looking at a phone or a screen. And it's really difficult to do because we've become so accustomed to looking at our phones in the bathroom, to reading Twitter, to doom scrolling. But that's not what we should be doing if we want to get a semblance of ourselves outside of this structure that basically tells us to keep looking. Because when you look at it that way, all of it is designed to push us into these rabbit holes, and we're better than that. It's harder than we think, but it's something that we have to do if we're going to A, use the internet properly, B, know how to control the internet so it doesn't control us. We have agency, but we also have the agency to choose all of these things. Whew, so that was a lot to take in for just a little bit of time, and I'm sure I skipped a lot, and there's a lot more. If any of you have more questions about this, I'll be glad to Zoom with you and talk this through, or if you have any questions, we could email about it, because this is an ongoing field of my research for now 6 years, so it's something that it's very hard to summarize in just a little bit. There'll be enough links in the Substack to kind of give you some more information to do your own research, but it's really information that I found helpful to me throughout the time of doing this. For homework, it's the same two types of things. You have an assignment and a discussion board. For the first, before the assignments, I put a link to Feels Good Man, the movie about Pepe the Frog. It's optional, you don't have to watch it, but I think it does a phenomenal, it's possibly my favorite documentary of 2020. It does a phenomenal job at explaining how Pepe evolved over the course of time, and explains, as best as I could, how the meme has become Pepe the meme. So that's an optional, you don't have to watch it, there's no response for it, but if you want to learn more about this and you want to be more in tune with how the internet works, that's a good tool. For homework, you have to, there's an assignment about making a YouTube radical. It's Kevin Roos's work for the New York Times. Both of these are actually New York Times based. Making of a YouTube Radical is a long form article. There's also the Rabbit Hole podcast. You could read either or, they're the same thing. I recommend the Rabbit Hole podcast, to be very honest with you. I think it was by far the best coverage of it. And it goes into PewDiePie and actually gives him the really great, possibly the best benefit of the doubt that I've ever seen for PewDiePie at the end, the last few episodes. It's also one of the best produced podcasts I've ever heard. So it's worth it just to hear the story. I think its total running time is 4 hours, that they're 30-minute episodes each. They're fantastic. But you're going to listen to a couple episodes or how many of them you want to, and you're going to respond to an assignment on that. And the discussion board is about everything is Gamergate. And that we didn't really get into here, which we should have. This is going to go on forever. So I'm going to give you the article. Gamergate was an event in 2014 that basically framed how we live today. Everything today is Gamergate. So it's a more recent article looking back on it. There's 4 or 5 articles inside this thing with a very beautiful landscaped website, really well done. You're gonna pick one of them and you're gonna respond to it on the discussion board, and you can create threads as usual, or you could start new ones or respond to others. But I want a substantive answer for it, how you feel about it. And that's basically what we have for this week. This was a really, I'm sure this wasn't as fulfilling as it could be in this short amount of time, but I appreciate you listening and following your way all the way through this. Next week we go on a break, so it ends in the heavy, and then you get a week to kind of digest. So I'm actually gonna make these deadlines a little further out for you, okay? So you don't have to jam everything into 1 week. Take a breather, take some time. I'm gonna put these assignment due dates in the middle of or early on in spring break, so you have some time to respond to this, because I really want you to take the time to either listen to Rabbit Hole, which highly recommended, or to read the articles that are inside the Everything is Gamergate article. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your attention, just part of the system, and I hope that you're doing well. Until next time, stay curious, stay well, and stay vigilant.